The theater was quiet. It's not silent, but heavy, the kind of quiet that wraps itself around every movement like a weight. Flashes from cameras bounced off velvet curtains and marble columns, but none of it touched him. Keanu Reeves stood in the hallway outside the grand auditorium, his back against the wall, his hands in his pockets. He wasn't late. He just didn't want to enter first. Inside, 3 seats had been reserved with golden markers. One for Sandra Bullock, one for Ana de Armas, one for Sweeney, and between them his. When the usher called his name gently, Keanu nodded once. He walked in with the same soft energy he always carried, calm, humble, not making a show of himself. The room noticed him. Of course they did. He passed people whispering, their heads turning, some offering a small smile, others just watching in silence. But he kept his eyes forward. As he approached the row, Sandra stood halfway. She gave him that familiar smile, the one they'd shared. Over years of working and life moments that never made it to the public, Anna turned to a gentle expression on her face, a quiet knowing. And Sydney, young but steady, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and smiled like someone meeting a childhood hero in real time. Keanu greeted them with a soft nod, but said nothing. Instead of turning to either of them, he looked past. Them, to the far left of the row, a 4th seat, there sat a woman no one expected. She wasn't famous. No one even recognized her. She wore a plain navy blue dress and a thin scarf. Her eyes were warm but tired. She looked up at Keanu, and the room seemed to shift. His face softened. Then he walked past Sandra, past Anna, past Sydney, sat down beside her. Quietly, Sandra blinked, confused for a beat. Anna glanced sideways. Sydney leaned slightly to see who the woman was, but none of them said a word. Keanu leaned over, whispered something to the woman. She smiled and patted his hand gently. Whatever was exchanged between them, it was silent, sacred. The kind of moment that didn't need explaining. It was like they had a bond years old, carved in silence, built on something invisible but real. The audience didn't know what to make of it. Rumors started in low whispers. Is she a distant relative? A teacher? Someone from his past? Someone he owed. But Keanu didn't know anyone. It wasn't why he sat beside her. His fingers stayed gently folded in his lap. He didn't glance at the cameras. He didn't perform. Just existed there beside her. Present. Respectful. Like her. Being there meant the world to him. That alone was enough. The ceremony hadn't even begun, but people couldn't stop looking. Not because of the stars, but because of something deeper, something honest. A man who could sit beside the world's most adored women and choose silence with someone unknown. Moments later, the host walked on stage and the lights dimmed. Sandra sat straighter. Anna crossed her legs. Sydney adjusted her dress. All 3 glanced at Keanu, wondering. The woman beside him reached into her small purse and took out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to him. He took it with both hands, like it was glass. Slowly, he opened it. And when he read the first line, his breath hitched. He hadn't seen that paper in years. It was written in careful handwriting, uneven, smudged at the corners. The top read, "For the day you forget who you are." Keanu folded it back up, gently, almost reverently. He put it inside his jacket pocket. Not his phone, not his wallet, just the note. And then he looked at her and he said the first words anyone heard him speak that night. "You still carry it?" She nodded once. Always. The moment didn't make headlines. It wasn't posted. No one knew what it meant. But for the rest of the night, Keanu didn't need to explain. Because kindness like that doesn't ask for attention. It just sits quietly beside you and waits. The cameras returned to the stage. Awards were announced. Applause echoed. But Keanu didn't clap with everyone else. He only clapped once. When the woman beside him gently raised her hands first, and in that quiet something began. Something deeper than fame. Something even the lights couldn't catch. When the event ended, people stood and clapped. Some cheered louder than others, Some used it as a chance to take photos. But Keanu didn't stand right away. He waited for her. The woman beside him moved slowly. Her fingers searched for her cane, and only when she had it in her hand did he rise. He didn't offer to lift her. He didn't rush her. Simply matched her pace, walking beside her as if there was nowhere else to be. Anna turned around, trying not to look obvious. Sandra leaned over and whispered, "Do you know who she is?" Anna shook her head. "No one does." Sydney stayed quiet. Her eyes followed Keanu as he walked the woman up the aisle. She wasn't curious for gossip. She was curious for truth. Because something about that moment didn't feel staged. It felt raw, old, like two souls that knew each other before all this noise. Outside the theater, the night was soft with wind. A few drops of rain floated in the air, but never fully fell. The woman stopped near a bench just past the main exit. Keanu helped her sit, then lowered himself beside her. The crowd passed. Around them, no one came too close. Maybe out of respect. Maybe because it didn't feel right to interrupt something sacred. Finally, Sandra came out, followed by Anna and Sydney. They stood a few feet away, hesitant. Then Sandra stepped forward. "Keanu," she said, her voice gentle, "will you introduce us?" Keanu looked up, surprised but calm. He turned to the woman beside him, then back to the three women. "This," he said softly, "is Sister Margot." The name didn't land right away. Then Sydney's eyes widened. "Wait, the school?" she asked. Anna frowned. "What school?" Sydney took a step closer. "When I was a kid, every Christmas, there was this donation letter. Sister Margot's shelter and school. It was in every Hollywood newsletter. Even back then," Keanu nodded. "Same letter came to my door. When I was barely starting out." Sandra blinked. "But she's not a mean. She's not in the news. No interviews. Nothing. 'Cause she never wanted to be," Keanu said. Then he looked at Margot with something close to reverence. She just kept showing up. Margot smiled, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Helping one is enough," she said. "Anything more is grace." Anna slowly sat on the bench beside her. Sandra and Sydney followed. For the next hour, they sat like that. For women and Keanu Reeves. No cameras. No scripts. Just soft voices, old stories, and small laughter that barely reached the sky. Margot told them about the school that had no roof one year, so they taught under trees. About the boy who came in without shoes and left with books, shoes, and a notebook full of poems. She told them how the letters she sent every December were handwritten. Always typewritten because typed words felt cold. One year, she said, a man sent back a letter. No money. Just a story. And that story helped me more than any check. Sydney leaned in. Was that man? Keanu smiled without answering. They didn't notice time pass until the parking lot began to empty. The wind had picked up, but none of them felt cold. Margot stood slowly. This time, Sandra offered her arm, and she took it. "You still carry the note?" Go asked Keanu as they walked toward the cars. He nodded. "Always." She smiled gently. "Good. Because sometimes the world forgets who you are, and sometimes. So do you." Keanu walked her to a small, older car. Not fancy. It's no driver, just simple. She opened the door herself and sat inside. Before closing it, she looked at him. "You're still kind," she said, and then she was gone. Keanu stood still long after the taillights faded. Sydney came up beside him. "Was she your teacher?" Keanu shook his head. "No, she was the teacher. When no one else showed up." The next morning, tabloids guessed everything. Secret aunt, retired producer, mystery love. But none of them were right. What mattered wasn't who she was. What mattered was what she did. And the truth was, she had taught Keanu the one thing no one else had ever taught him: how to sit in silence and still speak with grace. The next morning, Keanu didn't return to the studio. He canceled the meeting, postponed the shoot, and let his phone stay quiet for hours. Instead, he drove 2 hours north, past the cities and the noise, toward a place most people forgot. When he pulled into the gravel lot, the building looked the same, Old bricks, chipped paint. A crooked sign above the door that read "Home first, then school." He got out and stood there for a moment, his hands in his coat pockets, breathing. In the cool air, a young girl opened the door. No older than 15, she held a broom in one hand and squinted against the sun. "You're not here to film, right?" she asked, half joking, half serious. Keanu smiled. No cameras, just memory. She nodded and stepped aside. "You can. Come in, but it still smells like crayons and burnt toast." He chuckled softly and walked in. Inside, the smell hit him like a time machine. Chalk dust, faded books, plastic chairs, and warm bread. Nothing had changed. He walked down the hall. Slowly, there were hand-drawn pictures taped to the walls. Some were colored outside the lines. All were proud. He reached the room at the end. The same room he'd sat in years ago, back when he had no roles, no direction, just a tattered notebook and a bad haircut. He sat down in the tiny plastic chair. In the corner, that's where Sister Margot had found him all those years ago. Sitting with his head low, unsure why he'd come in, unsure if he even belonged, she had offered him a sandwich. Not questions, not lectures, just food. And when he finally told her he wanted to act, she didn't laugh. She didn't even flinch. She just handed him a piece of chalk and said, "Show me." He had stood at the front, hands shaking, pretending to be a tree. A broken, wind-blown tree. She clapped when he finished. "You know," she had said that day, "the strongest trees always move in silence." Now, years later, he whispered those same words to the empty room. A boy walked in, maybe 10, barefoot, holding a soccer ball. He saw Keanu and paused. "You the guy from the TV?" he asked. Keanu smiled. "Maybe." The boy came closer. "You here for Sister Margot?" Keanu nodded. "I just wanted to see the place again." The boy looked around. "She says actors don't wear crowns. They wear quiet." Keanu smiled at that. "He's right," she also says. "If you're really strong, you don't need to shout." Keanu looked at him. "What's your name? Milo?" He held out his hand. Keanu shook. Milo turned to go, then stopped. "You want to come watch? We're doing plays today." Keanu paused. His eyes softened. "I'd like that," he said. He followed the boy down the hallway, to a room filled with mismatched chairs, paper props, and kids with big dreams and shaky voices. And for the next hour, Keanu sat in the back, clapping louder than anyone else. When the little boy took his place as the tree, he stood strong, not waving, not bending. Still, and in that quiet moment, Keanu saw himself again. Not the man in the suit, not the actor on the stage, but the boy who once needed a place to belong, and now he realized it wasn't about just visiting it. It was about giving back. And he knew what he had to do next. Keanu didn't leave right after the play. Stayed. He stayed for lunch, sitting on a folding chair at a long table with peanut butter sandwiches and loud, laughing kids. Stayed for cleanup, helping stack chairs and wipe down sticky tables. He stayed until Sister Margot finally returned, walking through the front doors with a brown paper bag in one hand and a soft look in her eyes. She smiled the moment she saw him. "I thought you might come," she said, her voice calm, steady. "You always know," he replied. "I don't always know," she said. "I just trust the ones who remember where they came from." They sat together on the front steps, just like they used to. The sun was lower now, casting warm gold over the gravel. The sounds of children echoed in the background, feet running, someone yelling tag, a teacher calling for calm. Keanu looked at her quietly. "How do you keep it all going?" She looked out toward the swings. "Barely," she admitted. "Donations help. But sometimes I think it's held up more by belief than money." He nodded, then reached into his jacket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to her. She opened it. Her eyes moved slowly across the handwriting. She recognized it. It was her own. The note she had once written for him. "For the day you forget who you are." She touched the edges of the page. "You kept it all this time?" "Not just kept it," he said. "Lived by it." Quiet settled. Between them, thick and peaceful. After a while, he stood. I want to help, not just write a check. I want to do something real, something lasting. Sister Margot looked at him with a gentle, knowing smile. You already are. But Keanu shook his head. This place, it needs more. More space. More teachers. More roofs that don't leak. She didn't argue. She just said if it comes. From love, it'll last longer than any donation. The next week, things began moving quickly. Ana de Armas called him first. So, she said playfully, are you ever going to tell us who she really is? The reason I didn't? Quit, he replied. Then I want to meet her again. Sandra sent a message the same day I'm in. Whatever you're building, I'll help lift it. And Sydney? She didn't even wait. She drove out there herself. She brought boxes of art supplies and read books to the younger kids for 3 hours straight. But it wasn't just them. Word spread. Quietly. Respectfully, celebrities started asking about the shelter, not to promote themselves, not for photo ops, but because something about that night stuck with them. Keanu sat down with architects, not for a mansion, not for a nameplate, but for classrooms and gardens and music spaces. Places where kids could act, sing, build, heal, and he made one request. No plaque, he said. The woman beside him raised an eyebrow. No name. Not mine, he said. Just one sentence on the gate. Which sentence? He thought. About it. About the boy playing the tree. About the sandwiches. About the note. Then he said slowly, strength moves in silence. A few months later, the new wing opened. Kids rushed in before the ribbon was even cut. Sister Margot stood in the doorway, tears in her eyes. Keanu stood beside her, not as a star, not as a guest, but as someone who once sat in that tiny blue chair, wondering if he mattered. And now he knew. He mattered because he listened, because he remembered, because when the world looked the other way, he stayed seated beside the one who never did. The sun rose slowly over the new school wing. Glass windows glowed with soft orange light. Inside, laughter echoed off the fresh-painted walls. Children ran through the halls, tracing their fingers along new lockers and open doors. Like books, wood, and hope, Keanu walked in quietly. He didn't dress up. He didn't call ahead. He just showed up like always soft steps, calm hands, and eyes that held memory. Milo was the first to spot him. He was taller now, only by an inch, but it mattered. He ran up and gave Keanu a high five that turned into a hug. You missed. Tree practice, he said, mock serious. I'll catch the next rehearsal, Keanu replied, smiling. They walked together through the hallway. There were paintings on every wall now, drawings from the kids. Messages like, my voice matters. And this is home, in messy but proud handwriting. The classrooms had more chairs, more shelves, more color. In one room, a small group was learning guitar. In another, they were building cardboard rockets. Keanu stopped outside a door labeled the quiet room. Milo tugged on his sleeve. Want to see it? He nodded. Inside, the space was calm, low lighting, soft cushions, shelves with books and journals. A single window looking out at the garden. On one wall, a plaque not with Keanu's name, but with the words he'd asked for. Strength moves in silence. Keanu stood still for a long time. He didn't speak. He just breathed. Milo sat down in one of the chairs. They say this room helps kids who feel too much. Keanu looked at him. Do you feel too much? Milo shrugged. Sometimes. I used to feel alone. Not anymore. Outside voices called for Milo. He stood and ran out, leaving Keanu in the quiet again. Sister Margot found him there a few minutes later. You did something beautiful, she said. So did you, he replied. She handed him an envelope. Old, yellowed, hand-addressed, he opened it. Inside was a faded photo. 2 people standing under a tree. One was a teenage Keanu, the other Sister Margot. They were both laughing. No one had seen that photo before, not even him. I kept this. She said, because that was the first time you smiled here. He stared at the photo. He didn't speak, then he folded it slowly, placed it into his coat pocket next to the old note. Later that week, a reporter showed up outside the school. Not with cameras, not with a team, just herself, a notebook, and genuine curiosity. Didn't ask for a tour, she just said, "I heard something beautiful happened here." Keanu didn't speak to her. Instead, he asked if she wanted to watch a play the kids were performing that afternoon. She agreed. The play wasn't perfect. Lines were forgotten. Costumes fell apart. One kid sneezed so loud the others froze. But none of that mattered. Because the audience clapped like it was Broadway, the kids beamed. At the end, they all stood in a line and bowed together. The reporter wiped her eyes. She whispered, "This place. It's not about charity, is it?" Keanu looked at her. "It's about belonging," he said. The next morning, a small article appeared. No headlines, just a story titled, "A Place Where Silence Speaks." And that was enough. The world didn't need to know every detail, not the photo, not the note, not the room, because the people who needed to know already did. A year later, the school looked even more alive. Flowers bloomed along the path. Laughter rang from the open windows. Sister Margot's scarf still hung on the same hook by the door, even though she had officially retired 3 months ago. She said it was time, she said. The place no longer needed her voice, only her blessing. She left quietly. No big farewell. No speech. Just a warm hug for every child and a soft line written on the office board. Love louder by listening? Keanu came. That day too, of course. He didn't speak, just walked beside her one last time through the halls they'd rebuilt together. When she climbed into her old car, she looked at him with the same eyes that had once seen through all his noise and doubt. "You were never lost," she whispered, "but just waiting to be quiet enough to hear yourself." She drove away with the window down, waving with 2 fingers, but her presence never left. Weeks later, the school hosted its first annual Quiet Voices Festival. It was an idea Sydney had started, not a performance, not a talent show, just an open mic where kids could speak, sing, paint, or stand, be celebrated. Anna brought new costumes. Sandra donated thousands of books. Sydney came with microphones. And tea for everyone. Keanu sat at the back, as always. No spotlight. No fanfare. He clapped for every child like it was their opening night on the biggest stage in the world. When Milo stepped up to speak, now 11 and steadier in his voice, the room held its breath. He looked out at everyone and said, "I used to think strength was loud, like yelling, like fists, like breaking things. But then someone told me, strength is what holds you up when no one sees. And kindness is what you do when no one's watching." He paused, looked down, then looked directly at Keanu, and "I want to thank the man who sat with me in silence, didn't laugh when I forgot my lines, who clapped when I stood still and called it bravery. He didn't save me with speeches, saved me by staying." The room stood up before the speech even ended, but Keanu didn't. He just smiled. Later that night, after the kids went home and the lights dimmed, he walked through the garden behind the school. Soft winds danced through the trees. The stars were clear. He reached into his coat. First, he pulled out the old letter, "For the day you forget who you are," then the photo. The one of him and Margot, both laughing under a crooked tree, and last, a small note folded by Milo's hand. He'd found it on his chair after the festival. It read, "You taught me how to stand still without feeling small." Keanu stood in that garden for a long time, not thinking, not remembering, just being. Because for the first time in his life, he didn't feel the need to be more than this. Not an actor, not a symbol, just a man who had sat beside someone long ago and stayed, and in the silence of that moment, he understood something Margot had always tried to teach him. The world doesn't change because of noise. It changes because someone stayed long enough to listen.